Thank you very much. Many of you know, of course, the outlines of Paul Volcker's career. But the question, who is Paul Volcker, is not so easy to answer. Paul and I have been friends for nearly 6 decades. So let me see if I can't shed a little light from my perspective. I still recall vividly our first meeting. It was 1957, and I had been newly hired as an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Walking down the hall on the 9th floor, where the research department was housed at that time, was a very tall man, Paul Volcker, 6 feet 7 inches tall. He was chewing on a stogie, that's a lousy cigar, and he was absorbed scribbling notes on a yellow pad as he approached me. "I'm Henry Kaufman," I introduced myself. "Well," he responded, "I'm Paul Volcker, and you're the new fellow in financial and trade." And then, with a brisk good luck, he rambled on. And there he was, a Jersey boy with background who already had enjoyed a reputation as a wunderkind, having graduated from Princeton Woodrow Wilson School, earned a master's degree in public administration from Harvard, and been a fellow at the London School of Economics. Over the years, I came to see special implications in Paul's great height. It causes most individuals he's speaking with to literally look up to him, as many of us have done. But there's something else. As a central figure in our nation's economic policymaking, Paul has demonstrated again and again extraordinary vision, an ability to see well beyond the horizon that limit others. Sometimes I wonder if I had been 6 feet 7 inches tall, how much better my long-term vision would have been. Or for that matter, if most economists had been very tall, would their vision of the future have improved, and would they have made less use, depending so much on econometric analysis and quantitative risk-taking techniques? Now, another defining characteristic of Paul, it seems to me, is his core dedication to public life. Now, I suspect his father, the first municipal manager of Teaneck, New Jersey, was an important contributing role. It is increasingly difficult to fathom in our political, cynical times that a man of Paul's talent would remain in government service for such a long period of time in spite of so many attractive alternatives. Between 57 and 69, Paul put in 2 stints at the Chase Manhattan Bank and once at the Treasury as Deputy Undersecretary for Monetary Affairs, which placed him in the thick of monetary policy, both domestically and internationally. When Paul became Undersecretary of the Treasury for International Monetary Affairs in 1969, he probably didn't anticipate the challenges he would soon confront. President Nixon's closing of the gold window in August 1971 brought an end to the Bretton Woods system that had governed international monetary relations for decades. By helping to navigate the new waters with a steady hand, Paul demonstrated considerable political skills, not merely economic ones. Paul returned to the New York Fed as the president in 1975, and 4 years later, he was appointed chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve Board. Now, accepting President Carter's invitation to lead the Fed was a difficult decision. It came with a significant cut in salary, from $110,000 to $57,000. More than that, he had a family to support, and he was not to the manor born. Paul was an extremely devoted husband and father, and running the Fed would require him to shuttle regularly between Washington and New York City. Now, I believe that he accepted the appointment because the country was in the most in a very major monetary and economic crisis. Paul understood the gravity of the problem and explained to President Carter that higher interest rates were needed to wring the inflation out of the economy. Now, I suspect if President Carter would have realized how high interest rates were going to be taken, he probably wouldn't have made the appointment. Just imagine how aghast President Carter would have been if Paul had told him how tough he would soon push the interest rate vehicle. Just a few months after becoming chairman, Paul made a momentous Saturday evening announcement. The markets labeled the Fed's decision the Saturday Night's Massacre. Fortunately, it was never named the Volcker Massacre. The Volcker Fed at that time decided to become a monetarist and allow bank reserves to go up only by modest steady amounts and letting interest rates go to whatever level the market dictated. The action didn't get instant positive results. When Paul took office in 1979, the yield on 3-month Treasury bills and on long governments were as low as 9% and 8.3% respectively. A few years later, they reached 17% for Treasury bill rates and 15% for the long government bond. Now, some of you here surely don't remember that, some of you do. The tough monetary policy hardly made Paul a folk hero. No one wants to be disciplined, neither child nor adult. A construction workers' union shipped bricks to his office, saying they were no longer needed. Quite a few economists and business leaders voiced their opposition. Even some Fed governors opposed to monetary austerity, and Paul nearly resigned, perhaps at least on one occasion. Paul's determination and persistence, however, worked, and by the time he left office in 1987, the yield on 3-month Treasury bills was down to 5.3%, and the yield on long government bonds to 7.5%. But equally important, the Consumer Price Index, which had risen well above 10% in 1980, was down to 4%, and real GDP was on a 3.5% growth path. Appointed by a Democrat, Paul continued to serve for 7 years of the Reagan years before leaving the Fed in 1987. In the 3 decades since, his energy and dedications haven't flagged. He has occupied an astonishing array of key private and mostly public positions. Not surprisingly, he played a key role in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis as chairman and president of President Obama Economic Recovery Board, and as authority of the so-called Volcker Rule on regulatory reform. He served as chairman of Wolfenson, an investment bank, but mostly of his work has been in the public sector. He headed a commission to investigate the accounts of the Holocaust victims in Swiss accounts. He chaired an investigation in the Iraqi Oil for Food program for the United Nations. He chaired the Washington-based Group of 30 and the Trilateral Commission. He headed a review of the world's anti-corruption program that led to major reforms. And he currently heads the Volcker Alliance, something that's near to his heart, a nonpartisan group of business, academic, and government interests devoted to effective execution of public policies, helping to rebuild public trust in government, according to its major mission statement. Now, many public officials of far lesser influence have published memoirs. Not Paul. In contrast, rather than touting his accomplishments, Paul looks for the next important job to be done on the economic side of public policy and how he might help. Now, so I return to my opening question. Who is Paul Volcker? Well, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you a dear friend, a true public servant, a towering figure in more ways than one, and a living national treasure, Paul Volcker.